Hey everybody, ready to supercharge your English learning? Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of goal setting. And let me tell you, this isn't your typical just study harder advice.
Right.
We're going way beyond that.
Yeah.
We're breaking down an excerpt from English Learning Goals, a comprehensive guide to help you transform those vague, I wish I was better at English dreams into a concrete plan for fluency, one that actually gets you results.
You know, it's so true because a lot of people kind of get stuck in this loop of, I want to be better at English, but they never really get there.
Yeah.
It's like setting off on a trip with no destination. You're bound to get lost, right?
Exactly. And that's where the power of setting the right goals comes in.
Yeah.
You know, it's like having a GPS for your English learning journey. But here's the catch. Not all goals are created equal.
Oh, absolutely. Not just saying, oh, I want to improve my vocabulary. That's not going to cut it.
Right.
You need goals that are really laser focused and tailored to what you need specifically.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our source material highlights 4 major benefits of setting the right kind of goals: direction, motivation, measurability, and efficiency. And I'm curious, out of those 4, which one do you think is the most crucial for someone who's learning a language, and why?
I mean, that is a really tough question because I feel like all 4 of those work together so beautifully.
Yeah.
But if I had to pick just one, I would have to say measurability is super important. I mean, think about it. If you can't measure how you're doing, how do you know if you're actually making progress? It's kind of like trying to lose weight without a scale.
Yeah.
You might feel like you're making progress, but without actually seeing those numbers, it's really easy to kind of lose motivation and get discouraged.
That's such a good point. And I've definitely been there before, putting in the effort but not seeing the results. And our guide actually even backs this up with some research saying that people who track their progress are way more likely to actually stick to their goals.
Yeah.
It's almost like you get that little dopamine hit. You see those numbers going up, or you check things off your to-do list.
Exactly. And it's not even just about that good feeling.
Yeah.
Measurable goals actually help you stay accountable and make adjustments along the way, right? So if you're not seeing the progress that you want, you can be like, okay, maybe I need to change my approach or try a different strategy.
Yeah, so it's like this constant feedback loop. You're always checking in with yourself and making sure that you're on the right track.
Right.
But before we even get to setting those, measurable goals, our guide says we need to do something really important first. Know where we're starting from.
Yeah.
It's all about honest self-assessment.
Oh, absolutely. It's like going to the doctor. Before they can give you the right treatment, they need to figure out what's going on.
Right.
Same with learning English. You need to really identify what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, so I can focus my energy on the areas where it'll make the biggest impact.
And they give us 3 main ways to do this. Formal tests, self-reflection, and feedback from other people. It's interesting, though, because I feel like most people, when they think about assessing their English level, they jump straight to those formal tests, like, the CEFR or maybe the Duolingo English test.
Right. And those can be helpful for getting a general sense of your level. But let's be real, they can be a little intimidating, too.
Totally.
And sometimes they don't really capture the nuances of your individual skills. You could be amazing at reading English literature, but then really struggle to order a coffee, at a cafe.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
I remember when I was learning Spanish, I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Until I actually tried to have a conversation with a native speaker.
Oh, yeah.
And let's just say it was a humbling experience.
Yeah.
But it was also so valuable because it helped me pinpoint exactly what I needed to work on. Oh, my pronunciation needs some work and I need to be more fluent.
Exactly. And that's where self-reflection comes in. Recording yourself speaking or writing and then kind of going back and analyzing it can be super insightful. You start to notice little things that you might not have been aware of before, like maybe you use filler words a lot or you make the same grammar mistakes over and over again.
So it's about becoming more aware of your own language habits and really figuring out where you can improve. And of course, getting feedback from other people is super valuable too.
Oh, for sure. A fresh perspective can be so helpful, whether it's from a teacher, a language exchange partner, or even just a friend who's a native English speaker.
Yeah.
They can often point out things that you don't even notice yourself.
That's like having an extra set of eyes and ears on your English, helping you fine-tune those skills.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got our starting point figured out. Now our guide says the next step is to define our why for learning English. Why is this step so crucial, especially when we're talking about setting these really effective goals?
Well, think about it this way. Your why is your fuel. It's the driving force behind everything. Without a really strong personal reason for learning English, it's super easy to kind of lose steam when things get tough, Remember those measurable goals we were talking about? They're so much easier to stick to when you have that powerful why pushing you forward.
It's like having that internal motivation, that fire in your belly that keeps you going, even when you hit those roadblocks. And our guide gives us some really thought-provoking questions to help us uncover our why. Things like, what do you want to achieve and how will English improve your life? And they even give us some examples tied to things like your career travel education and personal enjoyment.
Those are great starting points, but the real magic happens when you take those examples and use them as inspiration to figure out your own unique why.
Right.
Maybe you want to be able to connect with family members who speak English. Maybe you dream of traveling the world and being able to talk to people from different cultures. Whatever it is, tap into that deep-seated reason that makes this journey meaningful for you.
I love that image, tapping into that deep-seated reason.
Yeah.
It's like finding your North Star, that guiding light that keeps you on course, even when things get rough. So we've assessed our starting point. We found our why. Now it's time to get specific with those goals. And I know you're a huge fan of a particular framework for making this happen, the SMART framework.
Oh, absolutely. This is where it gets really exciting because the SMART framework is like a recipe for success.
Right.
It takes those vague goals that we were talking about and turns them into something really concrete and achievable.
Okay, so for those who might not have encountered this magical acronym before, what does SMART actually stand for?
SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And each of those elements is super important for creating goals that are both effective and motivating.
So let's break it down, starting with specific. Why is it so important for our goals to be laser-focused?
Well, specific goals, they get rid of all that ambiguity instead of just saying something vague like, I want to improve my vocabulary. A specific goal would be something like, I want to learn 50 new vocabulary words that are related to business by the end of the month.
Okay.
See that clarity? It gives you a concrete target to work towards, and it helps you choose the right resources and strategies. It's like having a detailed map instead of just knowing the general direction you want to go.
Like the difference between saying I want to travel somewhere in Europe versus I want to spend 2 weeks exploring the art museums and cafes of Paris.
Exactly.
One is a vague wish, the other is an actual plan.
Right, and that brings us to measurables. We already talked about the importance of that, but how does this actually play out when you're creating goals for learning English?
Well, it's about including a quantifiable target in your goal statement. Instead of saying I want to improve a measurable goal would be something like, I want to be able to have a 5-minute conversation about my hobbies in English without pausing too much within 2 months. So you're giving yourself a specific time frame and a concrete way to see how you're doing.
And that's huge for staying motivated.
Yeah.
Imagine how good it'll feel when you actually hit that 5-minute mark and you realize, wow, I'm actually speaking more fluently.
Yeah.
That's way more motivating than just kind of hoping to improve.
Right. It's like those fitness trackers that tell you, how many steps you've taken or how many calories you've burned. Those little bits of data can be so motivating because it shows you that your efforts are actually paying off.
Absolutely. And that feeling of accomplishment makes you want to keep going. Okay, so we've got specific and measurables. Let's move on to achievable. Why is it so important to set goals that are actually realistic, even if they seem small at first?
Well, I think a lot of us, myself included, have fallen into that trap of setting these huge goals that are just way too ambitious. We get caught up in the excitement of learning English and think, oh yeah, I can learn this whole language in a month, or I can become fluent overnight. But the reality is that language learning, it takes time and effort. And if we set these unrealistic goals, we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment and frustration.
Right. It's like trying to run a marathon with zero training.
Yeah.
You might start off strong, but you're probably going to burn out or hurt yourself along the way. It's much better to start with shorter distances and then slowly build up your endurance.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between pushing yourself, but also setting yourself up for success. And that brings us to relevant. Why is it so important to make sure our goals actually align with our why, that bigger picture?
Remember that powerful why that we were talking about? Yeah. Your goals, they should be like a direct reflection of that deeper motivation. If you want to be able to travel confidently, then your goals should focus on practical things like ordering food, asking for directions, booking a hotel room, things like that.
So it's all about tailoring those goals to your needs and your aspirations. And finally, we have time-bound. Why are deadlines so important when it comes to setting goals?
Deadlines, they create a sense of urgency and accountability. Without a specific time frame, it's really easy to procrastinate and let things slide.
It's like having a project due date. It forces you to prioritize and take action. Okay, so we've broken down each part of this SMART framework, but can you give us an example of how to take a vague goal and turn it into a SMART one?
Oh, absolutely. So let's go back to that example of I want to improve my speaking. A SMART version of that goal would be something like, I will practice speaking English for 15 minutes every day with a language partner, and I will aim to have a 5-minute conversation about my hobbies without pausing too much by the end of 8 weeks.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like night and day. That SMART goal is crystal clear. There's no room for confusion. It's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant, and it's time-bound. You've taken that vague wish and turned it into a blueprint for success.
Exactly. And the beauty of the SMART framework is that you can use it for anything in your life, not just learning English. It's a really powerful tool for turning your dreams into reality.
Okay, so we've set this amazing SMART goal, but I'm already feeling a little overwhelmed just thinking about it. Our guide also suggests that we break down those big goals into smaller steps. Why is this so helpful, especially when we're talking about something as complex as learning a language?
Breaking a large goal into smaller, more manageable steps, it really helps prevent that overwhelm, and it creates a sense of momentum. It's like climbing a mountain.
Yeah.
Instead of just focusing on the huge task of getting to the top, you break it down into smaller milestones, like reaching base camp, conquering the first ridge, and so on. And each small victory that you have builds your confidence and your motivation, and it makes the whole journey feel less intimidating.
Yeah, I love that analogy. It's like those video games where you level up gradually. You're gaining skills and experience along the way. Each level feels achievable, and then before you know it, you're at the final boss battle.
Exactly. And those little wins that you have, those trigger the release of dopamine, which is the feel-good hormone that makes us want to keep going.
So it's like a positive feedback loop. You set a small goal, you achieve it, you feel good, and then you're motivated to set another goal.
Precisely. The guide even gives an example of writing a 500-word essay in 3 months, which feels like a huge task, right?
Oh, yeah.
But if you break it down into smaller steps, it becomes much more doable. So you could start by just focusing on learning maybe 50 new words related to the essay topic in the first month, then work on writing 100-word paragraphs and getting feedback in the second month, and then finally practice writing full essays in the third month.
That makes so much sense. So you're taking that big, scary goal and transforming it into a series of smaller, more manageable challenges. And speaking of challenges, let's talk about those 4 core skills of English listening, speaking, reading, and writing. These are like the building blocks of fluency, and they're all connected.
Oh, absolutely. You can't really have one without the others. And it's important to remember that while you might prioritize 1 or 2 skills based on your goals, you really need to develop all 4 to become a well-rounded English speaker.
Right. You don't want to be that person who can read Shakespeare but can't hold a basic conversation.
Exactly. So let's dive into each skill and see how we can apply that SMART framework to set really effective goals for listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And don't worry, we'll share some practical strategies for each skill too. So stay tuned for part 2 of this episode, where we'll go deeper into setting SMART goals for each of those core English skills.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
We're going to give you all the tools you need to create that roadmap to fluency, a roadmap that actually works for you. So until then, happy learning.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're picking up right where we left off, exploring how to set those SMART goals for the 4 core English skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. It's like we're building a house, and these skills are the foundation.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Each skill supports the others, and together they create this strong and stable structure for your English fluency.
Exactly. And just like a house needs a blueprint, we need a clear plan for developing each of these skills. So let's start with listening. This is often considered the first hurdle for language learners, right?
It definitely is. You can't speak or write a language that you don't understand, right? So
Right.
It's really the foundation, and our guide suggests aiming to understand 80% of a 10-minute English podcast episode within 2 months.
Okay.
But how can we make that goal even smarter and more tailored to individual needs?
I love that you're pushing for that extra level of specificity, because it's so easy to just, copy and paste goals from a book or a website, but what works for one person might not work for another. Absolutely. For example, someone who's already pretty comfortable listening to podcasts in English, they might want to challenge themselves with a more advanced topic, or maybe listen to something where people are speaking faster.
Right.
While someone who's just starting out might choose shorter clips or videos with subtitles.
Yeah, and let's not forget about the power of active listening. It's not just about passively absorbing the sounds, but actively engaging with the material. Taking notes and even trying to shadow or repeat what you're hearing.
Those are all fantastic strategies. Shadowing in particular is so powerful and can really help you improve your listening quickly.
Yeah.
It's basically like you're mimicking a native speaker and training your ears and your tongue to work together.
It's like you're becoming the speaker.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got some smart goals and strategies for listening. Now let's move on to speaking, which is often the most daunting skill for language learners. It can feel so vulnerable to put yourself out there and actually speak in another language.
I totally get it. But remember, the key to overcoming that fear is practice. And just like with listening, we can set smart goals to make that practice more effective. Our guide suggests aiming to introduce myself and answer 5 common interview questions fluently in 6 weeks.
That's a great example of a really specific and time-bound goal. But how can we make it even more achievable and relevant to individual needs?
We can break it down into smaller steps. Maybe start by just practicing your introduction in front of a mirror.
Yeah.
Then you could record yourself answering those interview questions and listen back to see where you can improve.
Right.
You could even join a language exchange or find a tutor online to practice with.
Those are all fantastic strategies, and I think it's important to emphasize here that fluency doesn't mean speaking perfectly. It's about being able to communicate your ideas effectively, even if you make a few mistakes along the way.
Such an important point. Don't let the fear of making mistakes hold you back.
Right.
Mistakes are going to happen. They're inevitable. And that's actually how we learn.
Yeah.
The key is to embrace those mistakes as opportunities to grow.
I love that. Embrace the mistakes.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about reading for a lot of language learners. This is a skill that comes a little more easily than speaking, but it still requires a strategic approach.
Definitely. Our guide recommends aiming to read a 200-page English novel in 3 months. But remember, we can always adjust this goal to fit our interests and our reading level.
Absolutely. If you're a beginner, starting with graded readers or even children's books can be a great way to build your vocabulary and your confidence.
Yeah.
And as you progress, you can gradually challenge yourself with more complex texts. The key is to choose material that's engaging, but also appropriate for your level.
And don't forget about active reading.
Right.
Just like with listening, it's about really engaging with the text, not just skimming the words.
Right. Highlight new vocabulary, take notes, and even try summarizing what you've read in your own words. It helps you remember the information and develop a deeper understanding of the language.
Those are all great tips. And don't forget about the power of context when it comes to learning new vocabulary. So instead of just trying to memorize words from a list, try to learn them within the context of a story or an article. It makes the learning process more meaningful, and you're more likely to remember the words.
It's like the difference between seeing a word in a dictionary and actually using it in a conversation context. Brings the language to life.
Exactly. Okay, now let's move on to writing, which is often seen as the most challenging of those 4 core skills.
Yeah, it can definitely feel a little intimidating to express yourself in writing in another language, especially when you're worried about making grammar or vocabulary mistakes.
For sure, our guide suggests setting a goal to write a 150-word email to a friend with fewer than 5 grammar mistakes in 1 month.
Good.
But again, we can make this goal even smarter by tailoring it to our specific needs and goals.
For example, someone who needs to write emails for work might focus on developing a more formal writing style, while someone who wants to be more creative might practice writing short stories or poems.
Right, and there are so many resources out there to help you improve your writing, from online grammar checkers to writing workshops to language exchange partners who can give you feedback on your work.
And let's not forget about the power of reading as a way to improve your writing. By exposing yourself to well-written texts, you're absorbing grammar and vocabulary naturally. It's like osmosis for your brain.
That is a great analogy. Okay, so we've talked about the 4 core skills, but what about vocabulary and grammar? These are like the building blocks of language, and they deserve their own SMART goals.
Absolutely. Vocabulary is like the bricks, and grammar is the mortar that holds everything together.
Love it. Our guide suggests setting a goal to learn 10 new words per week that are related to your job and use them in sentences. This is a great example of a goal that's specific, measurable, and relevant.
Yeah.
But how can we make it even more achievable and engaging?
Well, instead of just memorizing words from a list, try incorporating those words into your daily life. Use flashcards, create your own sentences, or even label objects around your house in English.
I love those ideas. And let's not forget about spaced repetition when it comes to learning new vocabulary. Reviewing those words at regular intervals helps you remember them long term.
It's like planting a seed and then watering it regularly. You need to nurture those new words to help them grow.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about grammar, which can be a bit tricky, but it's essential for clear and effective communication.
Yeah, our guide recommends setting a goal to master the present perfect tense and use it correctly in 10 sentences by next month. This is a specific and time-bound goal, but how can we make it more engaging and less intimidating?
Instead of just memorizing rules from a textbook, try to understand the logic behind the grammar. Ask yourself, why is the present perfect used in this situation? What does it convey that other tenses don't? This deeper understanding will help you use the grammar more naturally and with more confidence.
It's like learning to play an instrument. You need to understand the theory behind the music to be able to improvise and create your own melodies.
Exactly, and there are so many fun resources out there to help you with grammar, from interactive games to YouTube videos to podcasts that break down these complex concepts in a way that's easy to understand.
And remember, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Grammar is a process, and it takes time and practice to master it. The key is to stay curious, keep practicing, and celebrate those small wins along the way.
Well said. Okay, we've covered so much in this episode. We've explored how to set SMART goals for listening, speaking, reading, writing vocabulary, and grammar. But what about actually putting those goals into action?
That's where steps 7, 8, and 9 come in. Creating a study plan, tracking your progress, and rewarding yourself.
These steps are so crucial for taking those SMART goals and making them a reality. It's like having a roadmap, a compass, and a cheering squad all rolled into one.
So stay tuned for part 3 of this episode, where we'll dive into the practicalities of planning, tracking, and celebrating your successes on your English learning journey. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've talked about so much already, from the power of SMART goals to setting specific targets for each of those core English skills. But now it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty of actually putting those goals into action.
Yeah. It's one thing to have those beautiful goals written down in your notebook or on your phone, but it's a whole other thing to actually make them happen.
It's like having a fancy sports car, just sitting in your garage.
Right.
It's not going to get you anywhere unless you actually get behind the wheel and drive.
That is such a great analogy. So let's talk about step 7, creating a study plan.
This is where we go from, dreaming to doing, from vision to action.
A study plan gives you that structure and that accountability. It's like having a personal trainer for your English learning journey.
Yeah.
Keeping you on track and motivated.
I love that. And our guide recommends breaking down your study time into daily, weekly, and monthly chunks.
Yeah, and remember, it's all about finding what works for you in your life. Maybe you can squeeze in 15 minutes of vocabulary practice while you're commuting to work, or dedicate an hour on Saturday morning to watching an English movie.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the power of those short daily bursts of learning. Even 10 minutes of focused practice every day can make a huge difference over time.
Consistency is key.
Yes.
And the guide also talks about using different tools to stay organized. So think planners, Google Calendar, or even those language learning apps.
Yeah, those apps can be so helpful, especially when you're busy. They can help you track your progress, set reminders, and even find language partners to practice with.
And don't forget about the power of just writing things down.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's nothing like physically writing things down to make them stick in your brain.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to step 8. Tracking your progress and staying flexible.
This step is all about celebrating those wins, both the big ones and the small ones, and being willing to adjust your approach as you go.
Yeah, tracking your progress isn't just about, checking things off a list. It's about really acknowledging how far you've come, which can be incredibly motivating.
For sure. The guide suggests keeping a journal to document your learning journey, recording yourself speaking every now and then to hear those improvements, and even taking like mini tests or quizzes to see how you're doing.
These are all fantastic ways to stay accountable and see those tangible results, which can be so encouraging.
And remember, it's okay to change your goals or your plan as you go. Life happens, and sometimes we need to adjust our course.
Exactly. Flexibility is key. Don't be afraid to revise your goals if they're not serving you anymore, or if your circumstances change.
Right. The key is to stay committed to the overall journey, even if the path looks a little different than you originally thought it would.
And now for the fun part. Step 9, rewarding yourself.
This step is all about making the process more enjoyable and sustainable. Because, let's be real, learning a language takes time and effort.
So it's important to celebrate those milestones and acknowledge your hard work.
Absolutely. Our guide suggests treating yourself to something you enjoy. Whether it's a cup of fancy coffee, a movie night, or even a weekend getaway.
But the important thing here is to choose rewards that are personally meaningful to you. What motivates one person might not work for another.
That's so true. It's about finding those little things that bring you joy and make the journey even more rewarding.
Maybe it's buying yourself that English novel you've been wanting to read, or finally booking that trip to an English-speaking country.
Whatever it is, make sure it's something you're really excited about and that you can look forward to as you're working towards your goals.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into English learning goals. We've explored the power of those SMART goals, the importance of making them personal, and the practical steps of planning, tracking, and rewarding yourself.
And we've also talked about, embracing those mistakes, staying flexible, and most importantly, finding joy in the process of learning.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this episode, we want to leave you with one final thought. What's one small step you can take today, right now, to move closer to your English learning goals?
Write it down, make it smart, and take action.
We're here cheering you on every step of the way. Happy learning, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive. All right, so let's dive into something that I think probably a lot of people have already thought about using YouTube to learn English. Who hasn't spent hours going down YouTube rabbit holes? But this time we're being intentional about it.
Yeah.
We've got this guide here that's packed with tips for actually learning English, not just getting lost in cute animal videos or something like that.
It's interesting how often we forget that YouTube is this massive library of language learning resources, and it's all free.
Totally free.
Yeah.
But to be honest, the sheer volume of content on YouTube can be so overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely.
This guide starts off strong, though, by emphasizing the need for clear goals.
Yes, because diving in without direction is kind of like wandering a supermarket on an empty stomach.
Yeah.
You end up with a basket full of random stuff,
right,
but no real meal.
That's true.
Are you trying to nail a job interview in English or debate current events? Or maybe finally understand all those British slang words that everyone seems to throw around,
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I've definitely fallen into the trap of randomly clicking on videos before. But this guide doesn't just stop at goal setting.
Yeah.
They actually analyze why certain channels work well for different learners.
Yeah.
For example, they highlight English with Lucy for pronunciation and idioms.
Yeah.
Which honestly makes sense because she's got a great way of breaking things down and using humor. I do wonder, though, doesn't relying too heavily on one channel limit you a bit?
Well, that's where being aware of your goals comes back in, I think.
Right.
Lucy is great for a specific purpose, but you might need a different channel for, say, business English or, listening to different accents.
That's true. It's like building a toolkit.
Right.
You need different tools for different tasks.
Exactly.
Speaking of tools, this guide talks about subtitles, like they're a secret weapon.
Oh, yeah.
They go beyond just basic comprehension.
Right.
They suggest things like turning them on and off to test yourself or using them to pick up new vocabulary.
Right.
I've actually tried that before, but found myself getting distracted by reading instead of actually listening.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Have you encountered that at all?
Definitely. Subtitles can be a double-edged sword.
Okay.
They're fantastic for beginners.
Right.
To connect spoken and written English or for, those tricky accents.
Yeah.
But if you're always reading, you're missing out on the nuances of pronunciation and natural speech flow.
It's about finding that balance, I guess. Yeah. Knowing when subtitles are helpful and when they might become a crutch.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of listening, this guide rightfully stresses active listening over passive watching.
Right, because just having a video on in the background while you do the dishes isn't going to magically make you fluent.
Exactly.
They suggest some pretty standard techniques like pausing and repeating or summarizing what you've learned.
Sure.
But then they take it a step further with this idea of shadowing with correction. Basically, you record yourself shadowing a speaker. Listen back to identify your pronunciation errors and then re-record.
That's a technique I haven't heard before.
Really?
I can see how that would be useful.
Yeah.
It takes the simple act of imitation to a deeper level by forcing you to be critical of your own pronunciation.
I like that. And it builds on this idea that YouTube can actually act as your pronunciation coach. There are tons of channels dedicated to specific sounds, like that tricky "the" sound or even whole accents.
And for building vocabulary, they encourage watching videos aligned with your personal interests.
Okay.
Which is a smart way to stay motivated.
Right.
If you're into cooking, for example, watching cooking channels in English will not only be enjoyable, but you'll naturally pick up a ton of relevant vocabulary.
It's learning in context. I love watching travel vlogs, so I've actually picked up a surprising amount of travel-related vocabulary just from those.
Right.
I do wonder, though, with all this emphasis on enjoyable content, how do we make sure we're still pushing ourselves and not just sticking to what's easy?
That's a valid concern. I think the key is to find a balance between enjoyment and challenge.
So maybe start with something you genuinely enjoy, and then as you get more comfortable, branch out and explore different channels and topics that might be a bit more challenging.
Exactly. It's about expanding your comfort zone gradually.
All right, so we've talked about goals, channel selection, subtitles, and active listening. Let's move on to some of the specific techniques the guide suggests for actually practicing speaking.
Okay. You know, it's funny how we often focus so much on input, listening, reading, absorbing information, that we forget about the most important part, actually speaking the language.
It's like learning to play an instrument. You can study music theory and watch virtuosos perform all day long, but until you pick up that instrument and start practicing, you won't actually become a musician.
Exactly. This guide offers some really creative techniques for using YouTube to practice speaking, even if you don't have a conversation partner. They call it talking back to the video.
Okay, so that sounds a bit like what we were discussing earlier with pausing and repeating, right? But instead of just mimicking, you're actually engaging with the content.
Precisely. Imagine you're watching a travel vlog and the host asks, "What's your favorite place to travel?" Instead of just passively listening, pause the video and answer the question out loud.
Okay.
It forces you to think on your feet and formulate a response in English.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I can see how that would be helpful for getting more comfortable with spontaneous speaking, something I definitely struggle with.
Yeah.
But isn't there a limit to how much you can actually talk back to a video? I mean, it's not a real conversation.
That's true, but it's a great starting point, especially for building confidence and fluency. The guide also suggests role-playing scenarios presented in videos. Let's say you're watching a scene at a restaurant.
Okay.
You can pretend you're the customer ordering food, or even the waiter taking the order.
That's a fun idea. It's like creating your own little English-speaking world using the video as a prompt. And since we're talking about pushing yourself, the guide also encourages writing comments in English below videos.
Ah, yes. Engaging with the community. It's a fantastic way to practice writing in a more authentic context. And you might even get feedback from native speakers or other learners.
I've actually done that before and was surprised by how helpful it was. Someone pointed out a grammar mistake I kept making, and I've never forgotten it since. It's like having a free language tutor right there in the comment section.
It also highlights the importance of finding a community of like-minded learners, whether it's on YouTube X or other language learning platforms.
Speaking of community, one thing that's been emphasized throughout this guide is consistency. It's not just about finding the right tools or techniques. It's about showing up and putting in the work regularly.
Think of it like exercise. You wouldn't expect to see results by going to the gym once a month, would you?
Definitely not. And I think it's easy to fall into that trap with language learning. We get excited, we try a bunch of new things, and then life gets in the way and we lose momentum. But this guide reminds us that even 10-15 minutes a day can make a huge difference over time.
Absolutely. Small, consistent efforts are far more effective than sporadic bursts of intense study. And it goes beyond just watching videos. It's about incorporating English into your daily life as much as possible.
Right, like listening to music, reading articles, even talking to yourself in English.
Yeah.
The key is to find ways to make it a habit, something you do without even thinking about it. And this guide doesn't just tell us what to do, it also highlights some common mistakes to avoid.
One of the biggest pitfalls they mention is starting with content that's too challenging.
Right.
It's tempting to jump into those advanced level videos thinking it'll accelerate our learning, but it can actually be counterproductive.
I've definitely been there. I remember trying to watch a documentary on quantum physics in English, thinking it would be good for my vocabulary.
Oh, wow.
Needless to say, I understood about 2 words.
It's like trying to run a marathon before you can even walk. You'll just end up exhausted and discouraged. The guide emphasizes the importance of starting with material that's appropriate for your level, even if it feels a bit too easy at first.
It's about building a solid foundation and gradually increasing the difficulty as you progress. And another mistake they highlight is not reviewing material. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of new content and forget to go back and revisit what we've already learned.
It's like taking notes in class and never looking at them again. Repetition and reinforcement are crucial for embedding new knowledge into long-term memory.
This guide suggests revisiting videos multiple times, practicing the vocabulary and grammar points covered, and even using them to refresh your memory on specific topics.
Yeah.
I've actually started doing that recently, and it's amazing how much more I retain the second or third time around.
It's about actively engaging with the material, not just passively consuming it. Which brings us to perhaps the most important point of all, avoiding passive watching.
We've touched on this throughout the episode, but it's worth repeating. Simply watching videos without actively participating won't lead to significant improvement.
It's like going to a cooking class and just watching the chef prepare the dishes. You might pick up a few tips and tricks,
Right.
but you won't actually learn to cook until you roll up your sleeves and start chopping those vegetables.
So how do we go from passive watching to active learning? The guide offers some fantastic ideas. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive, but this guide's got even more, like some bonus tips I think you'll find super helpful.
Oh yeah, one that stood out to me was downloading videos for offline practice.
Oh, right.
We live in a world where, we expect to be connected all the time, but let's be real, internet access isn't always reliable.
That's so true. I've been there.
Right.
Like imagine being on a long flight,
Yeah.
eager to practice your English, and then realizing, oh, I forgot to download that video.
Exactly.
Yeah.
YouTube Premium offers this feature, of course.
Right.
But the guide also mentions other safe download tools, Always important to make sure you're using a reputable source.
Definitely. Another tip is joining English learning communities, either on YouTube itself or platforms like X.
Sure.
I've been in a few of those online communities, and they're really supportive.
Yeah.
It's like having a global network of study buddies,
Right.
all going through the same challenges and cheering each other on.
That sense of community can be so motivating.
Yeah, you can share resources, practice with each other, even get feedback on your progress.
Exactly.
And speaking of feedback, the guide also reminds us that it's okay to ask for help.
Oh, for sure.
It's easy to feel stuck on a particular grammar point or a pronunciation issue, but there's no shame in reaching out for guidance.
Absolutely. Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective or a different explanation to make things click.
Yeah.
The guide encourages viewers to leave questions in the comment section.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You never know. The video creator themselves might respond.
Right.
Or another viewer might have the same question.
It's like tapping into the collective wisdom of the internet.
Exactly.
That brings us back to the core message of this deep dive. YouTube isn't just a platform for entertainment.
Right.
It's a powerful and accessible tool for learning English, no matter your level or learning style.
I completely agree.
We've explored so many different strategies in this episode.
Yeah.
Setting clear goals, finding the right channels, using subtitles wisely, actively listening, building vocabulary, improving pronunciation, engaging with enjoyable content, practicing speaking, and even avoiding common mistakes.
It's a lot.
It is a lot, but I think the key takeaway is that with the right approach and consistent effort, anyone could use YouTube to achieve their English learning goals.
It's truly remarkable how such a readily available resource can be so transformative.
Absolutely.
So as you embark on your YouTube English learning journey, I'll leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Yeah.
How can you personalize this experience to maximize both your progress and your enjoyment?
Ooh, that's a good question. It challenges us to really think about our individual learning preferences, our goals, and what truly motivates us.
Remember, the beauty of YouTube lies in its vastness and flexibility.
Right.
It's up to you to curate your own learning adventure.
So to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to dive in, explore, experiment, and most importantly, have fun.
Yes.
With consistent effort and the right strategies, you can unlock a world of possibilities in English.
Happy learning, everyone! Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive deep into English newspapers. I know a lot of you are looking to really boost your reading skills. And newspapers, they're like this treasure trove, aren't they? Vocabulary, grammar, you even get a glimpse of different cultures.
It's amazing, though, right? How instead of feeling intimidated, you can actually be strategic about it.
Totally, like picking the right path before you even start hiking.
Exactly. So first things first, finding a newspaper that matches your level. That's key.
Okay, so are we talking difficulty levels here? Easy trails, hard trails? What kind of maps are we looking at in the newspaper world?
Okay, so imagine you're just starting out.
Beginner hiker, eager but a little unsure.
There you go. News and Levels is great, even simple English Wikipedia. They use simpler language, clear sentences, helps you build up that confidence.
So those are the well-marked beginner-friendly trails. And as you improve,
You graduate to USA Today, maybe BBC News Online. Still real-world news, but presented in a more straightforward way. And bonus, most newspapers have free online versions. Test the waters before you commit.
I love that. It's like a little test run before you tackle the whole mountain. But I'm curious, what makes the big names like the New York Times, why are those considered advanced? Is it just the topics they cover?
It's more than that. The New York Times, for example, well, they're known for idioms, cultural references, those sentences that twist and turn. Tricky for non-native speakers.
So it's not just what they're talking about, it's how they're saying it. Okay, got it. I've picked my map, feeling good. But now I'm at the edge of this massive forest. Where do I even look first?
Yeah, where understanding the structure of a newspaper, that's your compass. You know, it's surprisingly consistent. You've got your front page with those big headlines, then world news, local news, opinion pieces, editorials. Once you know those sections, you can choose your path.
Okay, so I'm not wandering around lost. But there are still so many trees. How do I choose which ones to actually focus on?
That's where your hiking goal comes in.
My goal.
Yeah. Beginner, maybe the sports section, or lifestyle. Language tends to be less formal, more fun. But if you're aiming for the vocabulary summits, the opinion or editorial sections, those will really challenge you.
Ooh, interesting. So even within the same forest, some trails are steeper than others? I like that.
And once you've found your path, remember, each article has its own little structure too, like a well-defined trail within the larger forest.
Tell me more about this trail within a trail idea.
All right, so you've got the headline, that's like your trail marker, quick preview of what to expect. Then the byline tells you who's guiding you on this particular trail. And then the most important part, the lead paragraph.
Lead paragraph.
Sounds crucial.
It is. That's your trail overview. Who, what, when, where, why, all packed into that first paragraph. Understand that you're on the right track. If it's too difficult, maybe choose a different trail for now.
So it's like checking the trail description before you commit. Makes sense. But those trail markers, those headlines, sometimes they're pretty cryptic, aren't they? Yeah, headlines are an art form, really. A lot of information packed into just a few words.
They can feel like puzzles.
Exactly. But there's a logic to them. Remember the classic man bites dog?
Yeah, I've heard that one. But what's so special about it?
It shows how headlines cut out all the unnecessary words. Imagine the full sentence, a man bites a dog. They just get rid of everything but the essentials.
Wow, never thought about headlines like that before. So how do I get better at solving these headline riddles?
3 strategies. 1, find those key words, the nouns, the verbs, they carry the main meaning. 2, use the context of the whole article, fill in the blanks. And lastly, practice by rewriting headlines into full sentences, like working backwards to understand how the puzzle fits together.
Like taking apart a clock to see how it works and putting it back together. But could we try a live example together? That might really help me grasp this.
Sure. How about the headline, City bans plastic bags? What keywords stand out?
Well, city, bans, and then plastic bags.
Perfect. So piecing that together, the full sentence would probably be, the city bans plastic bags, meaning a city is making a rule against using plastic bags.
You make it sound so easy. I'm starting to see the pattern here, but there are tons of headlines in a newspaper. Do I need to decode every single one?
That's where our next strategy comes in, skimming. It's like browsing in a bookstore. You wouldn't read every book cover to cover, right?
Right.
You skim titles, maybe read a blurb, see what catches your eye. Headlines, photos, captions, they're like your bookstore displays. Get a feel for what's there before you dive in.
Okay, so looking for the headlines that spark my interest or visuals that draw me in. And once I've found a few promising leads, what then?
Choose 1 or 2 articles that really resonate, something you already know a bit about or find truly interesting. That background knowledge, it will make reading smoother, like having a familiar landmark to guide you.
Okay, so I've found my trail, feeling intrigued. Now what? Do I just start reading word for word?
Not so fast. Remember the lead paragraph we were talking about? That's your next checkpoint. See if you can get those 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, why, from that first paragraph.
Right, making sure I understand the basics before I commit to the whole hike.
Yeah.
But even when the trail seems clear, sometimes all those little details can get overwhelming, you know?
Absolutely. Here's a tip. Keep an eye out for those important markers, like names, dates, places, any numbers. Think of those as your signposts. They help you find your way in the bigger story.
So I'm paying attention to those key details, but sometimes I feel like I'm just reading the words, not really getting the meaning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's the secret to actually remembering what I read?
That's where something called active reading comes in. It's not just letting the words wash over you. It's about really engaging with the text, almost like you're having a conversation with it.
That sounds way more interesting than just passively reading. So how do I turn reading into a conversation?
Well, there are a few things you can try. Underlining or highlighting key phrases that can help them stand out. Or try summarizing each paragraph in your own words, even just mentally, or jotting down notes. Really forces you to think about what you're reading.
Summarizing each paragraph, that sounds like it would take forever, though.
I know, it can seem daunting at first. But think of it as building a mental map as you go along. You're marking those important landmarks so you can remember them later. And don't worry about being super detailed. Even a quick mental summary helps.
So I'm not writing a novel here, just a quick sketch of the main points. Okay, I can try that. But what about when I hit a word I've never seen before? It's like I've suddenly fallen into a hidden crevice on the trail.
Yeah, newspapers love to throw in those vocabulary challenges. But remember, you don't need to understand every single word to get the overall meaning.
So I don't need to panic and grab my dictionary every other sentence.
Exactly. The source we're looking at, it talks about the power of context. You can often figure out a word's meaning just from the sentences around it.
Oh, like a word puzzle.
Exactly. They give us a great example. The politician was indicted for corruption. Even if you don't know indicted, corruption hints at something bad, something illegal, right? So you can kind of guess indicted probably means something like charged with a crime.
Wow, that's so cool. I never thought about using the other words around to unlock the meaning. What else can I do?
Focusing on those high-frequency words, that's another big one. Those are the common verbs and nouns you see all the time in news articles. Report, claim, investigate, announce, decline.
So mastering the common language of the trail before I worry about the rare species, so to speak. Okay, got it. But what about those times when I'm totally stumped on a word? Is it okay to use a dictionary then?
Of course, dictionaries are your friends, but the source, it does warn against overusing them. Stopping every minute to look up a word, that can really interrupt your flow.
Yeah, it's like constantly checking your map instead of enjoying the scenery.
Exactly. They suggest picking maybe 3 to 5 key words per article, the ones that seem really important for understanding the main point.
Choosing my battles. I like it. But once I've looked up a word, how do I make sure it actually sticks in my memory?
Active learning comes in again. Instead of just reading the definition, try to use that word in your own sentence.
So I'm not just memorizing, I'm actually putting the word to use, making it part of my own vocabulary toolkit.
Got it. The source uses the word surge as an example. Let's say you read, there was a surge in demand for masks. Surge means a sudden increase. To make it stick, create a new sentence using surge, but in a totally different context, like a surge of tourists flooded the city during the festival.
I see. So by using the word in a new situation, it's more likely to stick in my memory.
Precisely. And the more you do this, those new words become less like scary obstacles and more like opportunities to expand your vocabulary.
This is all making so much more sense now, but I've got to be honest. Those long, complicated sentences that newspapers love to use, those really trip me up sometimes.
Yeah, those complex sentences can definitely feel like a detour, but don't worry, there are ways to navigate them.
Please, share your wisdom.
First tip, find the main clause. That's the heart of the sentence, the part that carries the most important information.
Okay, so I'm looking for the main path, the core of the sentence. Could you give me an example?
Sure, let's take this sentence. The mayor, who visited the school yesterday, announced a new program. The main clause is, the mayor announced a new program. All that extra stuff about visiting the school, that's like a side trail.
So I can come back to those details later if I want, but for now I'm focusing on the main point. Got it.
And once you've found that main idea, the rest of the sentence usually feels a lot less scary.
I feel more in control already. But what about those sentences that seem to go in all sorts of unexpected directions? Is there any way to anticipate those twists and turns?
One thing to keep in mind is that newspapers often use what's called passive voice. It's where the action is done to the subject, not by the subject. For example, the law was passed instead of Congress passed the law.
Passive voice. I always struggle with that. But knowing it's common in newspapers, that helps me be prepared for those unexpected grammatical turns.
Exactly. And sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Reading aloud can make a huge difference. When you hear the sentence spoken, it can help you process the rhythm and emphasis. Those twists and turns don't seem so confusing anymore.
That's a great idea. It's like having someone narrate the trail as you hike. But sometimes, even with a good guide, I need a little extra help. What about tools or resources to make this whole newspaper adventure easier?
Well, you're in luck. Our source has some awesome suggestions for tools and resources. Think of them as high-tech gadgets for your explorer's kit.
I love gadgets. Tell me more.
First up, the classic online dictionary. Sites like Merriam-Webster or Cambridge Dictionary, they're like mini encyclopedias right in your pocket. No more lugging around those heavy dictionaries.
So convenient. But what if I run into a whole phrase I don't understand, not just a single word?
Translation apps can be helpful in those situations. Apps like Google Translate can come in handy. But the source does say to be careful about relying on them too much.
Why is that? I thought translation apps were supposed to be good things.
They can be, but using them too much can actually slow down your language learning.
So it's like using a GPS for every step of your hike. You might get to your destination, but you won't really learn the terrain.
Exactly. The goal is to challenge yourself, to think in English, figure things out from the context. That's how you build real fluency.
I want to be an independent explorer, not someone who always needs a guide. What other tools can help me on this journey?
For those who also want to improve their listening, a lot of newspapers now have audio versions of their articles, even podcasts.
Audio versions, that's perfect. I can listen while I walk or commute, multitask. It's like having a personal newsreader.
And for those still building their confidence, there are websites specifically for English learners. They simplify news articles, making them much easier to understand.
This is great. So many resources. It's like having a whole team supporting me on my newspaper adventure.
And with all these tools, the most important thing is consistency. It's not about reading for hours. It's about making it a habit, even just 15 minutes each day.
So choosing a trail I can actually manage regularly, not one that makes me want to quit after the first try. But how do I stay motivated, and how do I know if I'm actually improving?
Good questions. Setting goals can help, like finishing one article a day, then maybe increasing to 2 or 3 as you get better. And mix it up. Read some serious news, then some lighter stuff to keep things interesting.
Right, got to keep things fun. I don't want to burn out on only reading about politics and economics.
And maybe the most important thing, track your progress. How many new words did you learn this week? Are you reading faster? Are those tricky sentences getting easier?
It's like noticing those milestones along the trail, those little victories that keep you going.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing your progress and enjoying the journey. The destination isn't the only important part.
You know, we've talked a lot about understanding the news, but what about actually doing something with it? Beyond just reading, I mean.
Now that's where things get really interesting. It's like when you reach a beautiful viewpoint on a hike. You can just admire the view, or you could take pictures, share it with others, maybe even sketch what you see.
I love that analogy. So how do we engage with the news we've read, so to speak?
Well, the source we're using, it encourages being more active, not just passively reading. They suggest a few things, like summarizing. After you finish an article, try putting the main points into your own words. Say it out loud, write it down, whatever works for you.
So it's not just about remembering the facts, but kind of organizing them in a way that makes sense to me.
It makes sense.
What other ways can we interact with what we've learned?
Talk about it. Find a friend, a teacher, even an online forum, and discuss what you read. It's like swapping hiking stories, Different perspectives can really make things clearer.
And who knows, maybe you'll even start a good debate. I like that. It's not just absorbing information, it's sharing it, seeing it from different angles. Anything else we can do to make this more active?
Don't be shy about asking questions. What surprised you? What do you want to know more about? Do you agree or disagree with the author? It's like exploring those little side trails that catch your eye.
Asking questions keeps that curiosity alive. It's going deeper than just the surface, finding out the why behind the news. What about turning this into, something more than just reading words? Any suggestions there?
Here's a fun one. Why not try writing your own news report based on the article you read? Pretend you're the journalist sharing this information. Really creative way to practice those new words and grammar you've learned, and it helps you understand things better too.
I love that, like creating your own little souvenir from the journey. Okay, I'm feeling inspired, but I've got to admit, sometimes I get discouraged before I even start. That feeling of being overwhelmed, like the trail ahead is just too much. What do you do when that happens?
Oh, that's totally normal. Every hiker feels that way sometimes, even the experienced ones. The source, it actually talks about those common challenges and gives some tips on how to deal with them.
Okay, let's hear them. I need all the help I can get.
The first one is that feeling of being overwhelmed. Right? All those new words, complicated sentences, it can feel like too much.
I know exactly what you mean. So what's the secret to not letting that overwhelm take over?
The source suggests a simple shift in thinking. Instead of focusing on what you don't get, celebrate what you do understand. Even if you only get half of what you read, that's still progress.
Yeah, like focusing on those small peaks you've climbed, even if you haven't reached the summit yet. I like that. Progress, not perfection. What about when I just feel bored by the news? Not every topic is going to be exciting, right?
True. The solution there is pretty easy. Choose topics you actually care about. If you love technology, read the text section. If you're into culture, focus on those articles. It should feel like choosing a trail you're excited to hike, not one that feels like a chore.
Right, reading shouldn't feel like homework. It should be fun. But what about when it takes me forever to read even a short article?
For that, the source recommends using a timer. Start with maybe 15 minutes, a manageable chunk of time, and as you get better, you can gradually increase it.
Like building up my hiking endurance. Start small, work my way up to those big all-day adventures. Okay, I think we've given our listeners a pretty solid guide to navigating English newspapers. But before we wrap up completely, why don't we look at that sample article the source provides, see all these tips in action?
Sounds good. The headline is, "Floods Force Thousands to Evacuate." Remember those headline decoding skills we talked about?
Let's see, we've got floods, force, thousands, and evacuate. Sounds like some major flooding is making people leave their homes.
Exactly. And if we quickly check the lead paragraph, it says, heavy rain caused severe flooding in the Midwest on Tuesday, forcing over 5,000 residents to leave their homes, officials said.
Perfect. So the who is those 5,000 residents, the what is being forced to evacuate, the when is Tuesday, where is the Midwest, and the why is all that rain and flooding.
Nailed it. And notice they use the word evacuate, which means to leave a dangerous area. You'll see that word a lot in news reports about things like natural disasters.
Okay, so with all that in mind, how would you summarize this article in just a couple of sentences?
All right, so heavy rain in the Midwest caused massive flooding on Tuesday, which meant thousands of people had to leave their homes. Authorities are now helping those affected by the floods, providing aid and shelter.
Look at that. We went from a confusing headline to a clear understanding of the event, all thanks to those strategies we've been talking about.
And remember, that's just one example. You can use these techniques on any article you come across. Practice decoding headlines, finding those 5 W's, making your own summaries. It's like a workout for your English skills.
Speaking of workouts, I think it's important to say that even with all these tools and tips, there are going to be times when we just don't get something. What advice do you have for those moments of frustration?
It's so important to remember that even the best hikers run into unexpected obstacles. The key is to not let it stop you. You don't have to understand every single word to get the main idea. Sometimes it's okay to skip a difficult word or phrase and see if the rest of the sentence still makes sense.
It's like choosing to go around a really tough part of the trail and picking it back up a little further on. You might miss some details, but you'll still get where you're going.
Exactly. And if you're really stuck on a sentence or a whole paragraph, don't be afraid to move on. It's better to focus on what you do understand and enjoy the process, rather than get bogged down in frustration.
Right. Pick your battles right. And remember, learning a language, it's a journey, not a race. What else helps when those doubts creep in?
Sometimes just rereading the tricky part a few times can make a difference. Give your brain a chance to process things, make those connections, and don't underestimate the power of a break. If you're feeling mentally tired, step away for a bit. Go for a walk, have some tea, listen to music. When you come back, you'll probably find you're ready to tackle that challenge with fresh eyes.
Like taking a rest stop on the trail, enjoying the scenery, and recharging before you continue hiking.
Exactly. Learning a language, it never really ends. There are always new words to learn, grammar to figure out, cultural things to discover. See those challenges as opportunities to grow and celebrate every step you take, even the small ones.
That's a really great way to look at it. It's about enjoying the learning process, knowing that fluency is something you keep building on.
Okay, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about and work with. What's the one big takeaway we want them to leave with today?
It's not about becoming an expert on the news right away. It's about giving yourself permission to enjoy learning, to explore new ideas, and to really connect with the world through what you read.
Beautifully put. So as we finish this deep dive, what's one small action you, our listener, can take today to put all of this into practice?
Maybe choose an article from an online newspaper, something that really interests you. Or look up one new word and make a sentence with it. Or even just set a timer for 15 minutes and just enjoy reading without any pressure.
Whatever you choose, remember, even small, consistent effort can lead to huge results over time.
So go out there, readers, and conquer those English newspapers. You've got this.
Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm your host, Mike, and today we're diving deep into using audiobooks to learn English.
Wonderful.
And joining me is language learning expert Sarah.
Hi, everyone.
Sarah, I'm a big audiobook fan, but I've always thought of them as entertainment, not really like a learning tool.
Right.
How can we actually use them to boost fluency?
That's a great question, Mike, and it's a common misconception. Audiobooks are so much more than just passive listening. They can be incredibly powerful for improving your English, no matter what level you're starting from.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What's the first step? Is it just about picking any audiobook and pressing play?
Well, not quite. Just like you wouldn't train for a marathon by running 26 miles on day one, you need an audiobook that matches your English level.
Makes sense.
Starting with something too complex can be discouraging, while something too simple might not challenge you enough.
So finding that sweet spot is key. What about active versus passive listening? Is it better to be fully focused, or can I just have the audiobook on in the background while I'm doing other things?
Both approaches have their benefits. Active listening is like laser focus, no distractions, maybe even following along with the text if you have it.
Okay.
It's about really absorbing the pronunciation, intonation, and grammar.
So it's like an intense workout for your listening skills.
Exactly. Now, passive listening is more about immersing yourself in the sounds of English. Think doing chores, walking, or even driving, as long as it's safe, of course. It helps train your ear to the natural rhythm and flow of the language.
I love that idea of training your ear. It makes the learning process feel more natural, almost effortless.
Exactly. And you can always switch back and forth between active and passive listening depending on your mood, your time, and what you want to achieve.
Okay, so we've chosen our audiobook and we're being strategic about our listening, but what about vocabulary? Audiobooks are packed with new words. How can we actually make those words stick?
That's where active engagement comes in. Repetition is key. When you hear a new word, don't just let it fly by. Rewind.
Okay.
Try to guess the meaning from the context. And then, this is crucial, write it down. Maybe create flashcards, keep a vocabulary journal, or use a language learning app.
Right.
Then, the most important step, use the new word.
Use it.
Try to incorporate it into your own speaking and writing.
You're so right about repetition. I used to keep a vocabulary notebook while listening to audiobooks, and it really helped. But isn't it overwhelming to try and learn so many new words at once? How do we prioritize?
That's a really good point. You don't need to learn every single new word. Focus on words that seem relevant to your interests or that come up frequently.
Okay.
And remember, quality over quantity. It's better to learn a few words well than to superficially memorize a long list.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned pronunciation earlier, and I've always been a bit self-conscious about my accent. Can audiobooks actually help with that?
Absolutely. Listening to different narrators with various accents is like giving your ears a workout and recognizing different ways English is spoken around the world. You'll start to pick up on the nuances of pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. It's like immersing yourself in a variety of English-speaking environments.
I never thought about it that way. You've got me thinking. I never realized how much I could learn about intonation just from listening to an audiobook. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. Intonation is like the music of language. It's how your voice rises and falls, how you stress certain words, and where you pause. Think about how a simple yes can mean different things depending on your intonation.
Wow, that's fascinating. I can see how mastering intonation can really make a difference in sounding more natural and fluent.
Exactly. And audiobooks are a fantastic way to observe and absorb these subtle but important aspects of language.
Okay, so we've covered choosing the right audiobook, active and passive listening, vocabulary building, and even tackling pronunciation and intonation. This is already so much more than I expected. What's next?
Well, the next step is to turn this knowledge into action and make audiobooks a regular part of your English learning routine. That's where the real magic happens.
So how can we actually make that happen? How do we integrate audiobooks into our already busy lives?
There are so many ways. We'll delve into specific tips and tricks in just a moment, but first, think about your daily routine. Are there any pockets of time where you could squeeze in some listening? Maybe during your commute while you're cooking dinner, or even when you're working out?
I used to think of my commute as wasted time, but now I see it as prime audiobook time.
That's the spirit. Even short bursts of listening can be beneficial waiting in line at the store. Perfect time for 5 minutes of audiobook immersion.
It's like turning those little moments of downtime into opportunities for growth.
Exactly. And, creating a specific routine can also be really helpful. Maybe you set aside 30 minutes every evening before bed to listen to a chapter or two, or maybe you make it a Sunday morning ritual to relax with an audiobook and a cup of coffee.
I love that idea of a ritual. It's about making it a conscious choice, not just something I'm squeezing in when I happen to remember.
Precisely. And the beauty of audiobooks is that they're so flexible, you can listen while you're doing other things, so it doesn't have to feel like you're adding something extra to your already busy schedule.
It's like multitasking, but in a way that actually benefits your mind.
Exactly. And speaking of making things easier, many audiobook apps have speed controls, which can be a game changer.
Oh, yes. I love being able to adjust the playback speed to match my comprehension level. Sometimes I slow it down if the narrator is particularly fast or if the topic is a bit challenging.
That's a great strategy. Slowing down the narration can make a world of difference for beginners. It gives you more time to process each word and really grasp what's being said. And on the flip side, more advanced learners might enjoy speeding up the narration to challenge themselves and get used to faster-paced English.
It's like choosing the right weight at the gym.
Yeah.
You want something that challenges you but doesn't overwhelm you.
That's a fantastic analogy. It's all about finding what works best for you and pushing yourself just a little bit outside your comfort zone.
Speaking of challenges, what about those times when we encounter new words or phrases that we don't understand? Should we stop and look them up every time?
Not necessarily. Context is key before you reach for the dictionary. Try to guess the meaning of the word based on the surrounding sentences. Often you'll be surprised at how much you can figure out just from the context.
So it's like a little detective game, using the clues to solve the mystery of the unknown word.
Exactly. And if you're really stumped, don't be afraid to pause the audiobook, jot down the word, and look it up later. But the key is to keep the flow going. You don't want to interrupt your listening experience too much.
I see what you mean. It's about finding that balance between active engagement and maintaining the enjoyment of the story.
That's exactly it. And once you've looked up those new words, try to use them as soon as possible. Incorporate them into your conversations, your writing, or even just your inner monologue. The more you use them, the more they'll become a natural part of your vocabulary.
It's like taking those new words out for a test drive and seeing how they handle on the road of real-life conversations.
I love that. So we've talked about finding those pockets of time for listening, creating a routine, using speed control strategically, and even tackling new vocabulary head-on. Do you feel like you're starting to see how audiobooks could be a powerful tool for learning English?
Absolutely. You've completely changed my perspective. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on choosing the right audiobooks. Are there specific genres or types of narrators that are particularly beneficial for language learners?
That's a great question. And the answer is, it depends.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
The most important thing is to choose audiobooks that you genuinely enjoy. Passion is a powerful motivator, and it'll make the learning process so much more enjoyable. If you love mysteries, go for it. If you're fascinated by biographies, dive right in.
So it's not just about finding books that are labeled as good for language learning. It's about finding books that spark your curiosity.
Exactly, but there are a few things to keep in mind in terms of narration. Look for narrators who have clear diction and a moderate pace. And don't be afraid to sample different accents. Listening to a variety of accents will train your ear to adapt to different ways English is spoken around the world.
That's a great tip. It's like exposing your ears to a diverse range of musical styles. The more you listen, the more nuanced your understanding becomes.
I love that analogy. And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Experiment with different genres, different narrators, and different listening speeds. Find what works best for you and your learning style.
This has been so insightful, Sarah. I'm already feeling inspired to revamp my audiobook listening habits. But before we move on to specific audiobook recommendations, is there anything else you'd like to add about making this a sustainable part of our language learning journey?
Yes. Actually, I think it's important to remember that consistency is key. Just like with any skill, the more you practice, the better you'll become. Even short bursts of listening can make a big difference over time. So don't feel pressured to listen for hours on end. Start small, find what works for you, and make it a regular part of your routine.
It's like building a muscle. Consistent workouts over time will yield the best results.
You got it. And don't be afraid to be patient with yourself. Language learning is a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, but the most important thing is to keep going and enjoy the ride.
That's such a great reminder, Sarah. This has been a gold mine of information.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to put all of this into practice. Now, let's move on to the part I've been waiting for, your specific audiobook recommendations for different levels of English learners. Welcome back to the Learn English Lab. We're ready to wrap up our deep dive into audiobooks for learning English. Sarah, we've covered so much ground already, from choosing the right audiobook to tackling pronunciation and building vocabulary. Now let's get to the part I've been most excited about, your audiobook recommendations for learners at different levels.
I'm happy to share some of my favorites. Let's start with beginners. For those just starting their English learning journey, it's crucial to pick books with clear narration, simple vocabulary, and engaging storylines. One that fits the bill perfectly is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White.
Charlotte's Web is a classic. I remember reading it as a child. It's a heartwarming story about friendship, and the language is so beautiful.
It really is. Another great option for beginners is The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. It's short, repetitive, and perfect for practicing those basic sentence structures, plus the vivid imagery can really help with comprehension.
I love that even in audio form, I can practically picture those colorful illustrations.
Right. Now, for intermediate learners who are ready for a bit more complexity, the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling is a fantastic choice. It's got a captivating storyline-rich vocabulary, and you can choose between the American narration by Jim Dale or the British narration by Stephen Fry, which is great for experiencing different accents.
Great choice. But I've heard some learners find the magical vocabulary a bit too specific. Is there something a bit more grounded in everyday language that you'd recommend?
That's a fair point for something more contemporary and relatable.
Yeah.
I recommend Wonder by R.J. Palacio. It's a touching story about kindness and acceptance, and the language is very accessible.
Wonder is such a powerful book. I can see how it would resonate with learners of all ages.
Absolutely. Now, for our advanced learners who are ready to tackle more challenging material, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee is an absolute must-listen. It's a powerful story with a Southern U.S. accent, rich vocabulary, and themes that will stay with you long after you finish listening.
That's a great suggestion. To Kill a Mockingbird is a literary masterpiece, and I think the audio version would really enhance the experience.
For nonfiction fans, I highly recommend Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. This book explores complex ideas about the history of humanity with clear, engaging language.
Wow, those are some heavy hitters. I could see how those books would really stretch those advanced English muscles.
Yeah.
Any other recommendations for our advanced listeners?
For something a little lighter but still challenging, I recommend The Martian by Andy Weir.
Okay.
It's a thrilling sci-fi adventure with witty dialogue and plenty of technical vocabulary.
That's a great one. I love how The Martian blends humor and suspense. Okay, Sarah, we've covered recommendations for beginners, intermediate, and advanced learners. As we wrap up our deep dive, what's the one key message you want our listeners to take away?
It's simple. Embrace the power of audiobooks. They are an incredible tool for language learning, offering a fun and engaging way to improve your listening skills, expand your vocabulary, and master the nuances of English. Find what you love, make it a habit, and watch your fluency soar.
Beautifully said, Sarah. This has been an incredibly enlightening journey into the world of audiobooks. And remember, listeners, this is just the beginning. There's a whole universe of audiobooks out there waiting to be discovered. So put on your headphones, press play, and let the language learning adventure begin. Until next time, happy listening.
Welcome to our deep dive, and this one is all about school and education.
Ooh, exciting.
It is. A listener sent in this article called Talking About School and Education, and we're going to unpack it together.
Sounds good.
It's got vocabulary in there, conversation tips, and even like comparisons of how school works around the world.
I like it.
By the end, you'll be fluent, my friend, in all things education.
That's the goal.
So it's really interesting. This article acknowledges the importance of communication when it comes to education.
Yeah.
It's something we all experience, obviously.
Of course.
But being able to actually discuss it
Right.
and all like the nuances, especially in a second language, it can be tricky.
It can be, yeah, so important though.
Oh, totally. And just having the right words can make such a difference.
For sure.
So this article kicks off with the vocabulary section.
Yep.
And it's not just basic stuff, right?
Right.
It breaks down like school types, subjects, even common phrases you might hear in a school setting. You know?
Yeah.
Like just that foundation is huge.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't have that, then, how are you going to discuss this complex topic?
Exactly.
And imagine, you're discussing education systems with someone from another country.
Right.
What you call elementary school, it might cover different ages or subjects elsewhere.
Totally. It's so true.
Right. And even within the same language, terms can have different meanings depending on where you are, like college and university. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, but in other places, they mean very different things.
Huge difference, yeah.
This article even gives examples of how those terms are used in the US versus the UK, which is really helpful.
That's a great example.
Yeah, very helpful.
Yeah, because those subtle differences, they can lead to confusion.
Totally.
So having that vocabulary foundation is key for navigating conversations about education with clarity and confidence.
100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's like the building blocks.
Yeah, it is the foundation.
Yeah.
But speaking of conversations,
Okay.
the article doesn't stop at just vocabulary.
Right.
It goes on to provide these like common questions that you might encounter
Okay.
when talking about school.
Yeah.
Things like,
Give me examples.
what's your favorite subject? Or how is school different in your country?
I like those. Those are good.
Right. And it even gives you sample answers,
Oh, wow.
which is really helpful for, practicing your responses.
That's like having a conversation cheat sheet.
It is.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is. It's like, you can practice these phrases and questions and really have some engaging discussions. Whether you're talking to other students or teachers or even someone you've just met.
Yeah, like if you bump into someone at the coffee shop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
At the grocery store. Yeah, wherever.
Exactly. And what's even better is that it includes sections on positive and negative phrases.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Okay.
We all have opinions about school.
For sure.
Right. But sometimes expressing those opinions, especially the negative ones,
Yeah.
can be a little awkward.
Sure.
So, this article kind of gives you the tools to express yourself,
Okay.
but politely and constructively.
That's a good point.
For example, instead of saying, I hate math, you could say,
Right.
math is challenging for me because,
Much better. I like that.
right, it's all about framing your thoughts
Yeah.
in a way that encourages dialogue rather than like shutting down the conversation.
Yeah. It's all about,
Yeah,
keeping that conversation going.
it is. And it's a good life skill in general, not just for talking about school.
Oh, for sure.
Being able to give constructive feedback.
Yeah.
It's valuable in any situation.
Absolutely.
So,
Right.
it's great. But speaking of different perspectives,
Okay.
this article takes us on a mini world tour of education.
Oh, fun. Where are we going?
I know, right?
Yeah.
It dives into these specific examples of contrasting educational approaches.
Okay.
Take Japan and Finland, for instance.
Right.
Their systems highlight very different philosophies.
Interesting.
Right. So, like, in Japan, students are responsible for cleaning their classrooms.
Really?
Talk about building character.
Wow.
And their school days are much longer
Yeah.
than what many of us might be used to.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
And then you have Finland, which is known for its shorter school days,
Okay.
emphasis on playtime.
Interesting.
And yet they consistently achieve like high academic results.
So different approaches.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes you think,
It really does.
like, what constitutes effective education?
Right.
Is it about structure and long hours?
Mhm.
Or is it fostering a love of learning through like autonomy and play?
Those are great questions.
I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not sure. Food for thought, though.
Yeah, definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
And this article doesn't shy away from like present day challenges either.
Oh, okay.
It touches on education right now in March 2025.
Wow. So current.
Right.
Yeah.
And it specifically brings up the rise of online learning, which I'm sure is something you've experienced firsthand.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, the pandemic definitely like accelerated the adoption of online learning.
It really did. It was huge.
And it's really sparked a debate, hasn't it?
Oh, for sure.
About the future of education.
Yeah.
Will traditional schools become a thing of the past, or
Right. Okay.
is there still value in like in-person learning?
Those are the big questions.
What are your thoughts on this?
It's a tough one.
It is.
I think there's room for both.
Okay.
Online learning has its advantages, like flexibility,
Yeah.
accessibility.
Totally.
But there's something unique
Yeah.
about face-to-face interaction and the hands-on experiences
Yeah.
you get in a traditional classroom.
It's hard to replicate.
It is.
Yeah.
I think a hybrid approach
Yeah.
that combines, the best of both worlds
Yeah.
seems like the most likely outcome.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. But the key takeaway here is that, this conversation is ongoing.
Yeah.
And it's something we should all be engaged in.
100%.
So
Yeah.
what do you envision
Yeah.
for the future of education?
It's a question I'm still pondering.
It's a good one.
This deep dive is really making me like reflect on my own school experiences.
Yeah.
The article has a section called My School Memories,
Great.
where it encourages you to like think back to your own school days.
I love that.
Yeah. It poses questions like,
What kinds of questions?
what did you like about school?
Uh-huh.
who was your favorite teacher,
Oh, yeah?
and what's one memory that stands out?
Nice. I like that. Yeah.
So speaking of memories, a hilarious one just popped into my head from my elementary school days.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
It involves a spelling bee,
Okay.
a word I just couldn't spell,
Right.
and a whole lot of laughter.
Oh, no, this is good.
So picture this. It's 3rd grade, and we're having a class spelling bee, and I was a pretty good speller.
Yeah.
Still am, actually. But there was this one kid,
Oh,
Kevin, who was like my arch nemesis.
the rival.
Oh, yeah, when it
Fascinating.
came to spelling.
Oh, the spelling bee rivalry.
The tension was real.
It's amazing how those like childhood competitions can stay with us.
Right. So we were going back and forth,
Mm.
word after word, and it finally came down to the two of us.
Oh, wow. The pressure's on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And the teacher announced the final word, encyclopedia.
Oh, that's a tough one. Even for adults.
I know, right?
I can only imagine the pressure.
Oh, I was sweating bullets.
Yeah.
So Kevin went first.
Okay.
And of course, he
Yeah.
spelled it perfectly.
Of course you did.
When it was my turn, my mind went completely blank.
Oh, no. Stage fright.
I know.
Yeah.
It can hit even the best of us.
It happens.
So I started spelling it,
Okay.
Encyclo, and then nothing.
Oh, no.
I stood there for what felt like forever,
Right.
trying to remember the rest of the word.
Uh-huh.
And finally, in a moment of pure panic, I blurted out, PEDIA.
PDA.
I know, not even close.
Well, at least you got part of it, right?
The whole class erupted in laughter.
Oh, no.
Even the teacher couldn't help but chuckle.
I bet.
I was mortified.
Yeah.
But looking back, it's a pretty funny story.
It's funny how those like seemingly embarrassing moments
Yeah,
often become our fondest memories.
they do.
But beyond the humor, I think your story highlights something really important.
Okay.
The role of emotion in learning.
Yeah.
You know, those moments, whether positive or negative,
Mhm.
they stick with us because they had an impact,
That's so true.
you know?
And this article really encourages us to like tap into those experiences. You know, it's not just about, acing tests or memorizing facts.
Right.
It's about how those experiences, those moments shape the way we see learning and education.
I love that it's about, developing critical thinking skills,
Mm-hmm.
fostering a genuine love of learning,
Yeah.
and preparing individuals to like thrive in this complex and ever-changing world.
Totally. And thinking about, how different education can be around the world.
Right.
Like we talked about with Japan and Finland.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how important it is to like understand these diverse perspectives.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in our increasingly interconnected world,
Right.
exposure to diverse educational philosophies
Hmm.
is essential for developing like well-rounded individuals,
Uh-huh.
people who can think critically,
Yeah.
collaborate effectively,
Mhm.
and appreciate different ways of approaching problems.
I'm curious, thinking back on your own education,
Okay.
what was one thing that like really stood out to you? Was it a teacher? A subject that ignited your passion, or even just a challenging experience that shaped your outlook?
That's a great question. For me,
Mhm.
it wasn't a specific subject or teacher that stood out.
Okay.
It was more like the overall emphasis on
Mhm.
critical thinking and problem solving.
Right.
We were constantly encouraged to like question assumptions,
Mhm.
analyze information,
Yeah.
and come to our own conclusions.
Right.
And this approach has really stayed with me throughout life, far beyond the classroom.
That's amazing. It sounds like you had an educational experience that truly like prepared you
Yeah,
for the real world.
it did.
What about you? What stands out when you think back on your school days?
Well, one thing that comes to mind, it was a project I did in high school
Yeah, okay.
about the history of education.
Interesting.
And it wasn't just about like memorizing dates and names,
Right.
We had to like research different pedagogical approaches throughout history,
How?
analyze their strengths and weaknesses,
Yep.
and even present our findings in a creative way.
Cool.
It really like ignited my curiosity about the different ways people have learned and taught
Uh-huh.
throughout time.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
That's amazing how like a single project
Yeah,
can spark a lifelong interest.
absolutely.
And this deep dive is all about igniting that same curiosity.
Right.
We've covered so much,
Yeah.
from like essential vocabulary
Wow.
to global perspective,
Yeah.
and even delved into our own personal experiences.
It's been great.
And we've touched on some really big questions
Yes.
about the future of learning, right?
Yeah.
Especially with the rise of online education and that ongoing debate about what constitutes effective teaching.
For sure.
It's a dynamic landscape.
It is constantly changing.
But I think even with all these changes, one thing remains constant.
What's that?
The importance of being able to communicate clearly and confidently when discussing education. Whether you're talking to teachers, classmates, or even, policymakers.
Right.
Being able to express your thoughts and ideas effectively is so crucial
100%.
for creating positive change.
Yeah, you have to be able to communicate those ideas.
Exactly. And that's where this article that you sent us really shines.
Yeah.
I think it's giving us a toolkit,
Yeah.
to navigate these conversations about school and education, equipping us with the vocabulary, phrases, and even the confidence to make our voices heard.
It's so important to feel empowered.
It is.
To share your thoughts and opinions.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that language is such a powerful tool
Absolutely.
for understanding and shaping the world around us.
Couldn't agree more.
So what have been your biggest takeaways from our deep dive today?
Ooh, that's a good question.
What resonated with you the most?
I think for me, it's just that reminder that education is so much more than just grades and tests. It's about, fostering critical thinking, nurturing curiosity, and preparing individuals to be engaged and compassionate citizens of the world.
That's beautiful.
And I think this article gives us the tools to really talk about these important issues.
Absolutely.
In a meaningful way.
It does.
It
does.
It's about recognizing that education is a continuous journey, not just a destination.
Oh, I like that.
We're all constantly learning and evolving, right?
Yeah.
And this article encourages us to embrace that journey with confidence and enthusiasm.
Love it. As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question.
All right, hit me with it.
We've talked about different education systems approaches, but what are the core values that should underpin any education system?
Ooh.
What qualities do we want to cultivate in future generations?
That's a really great question to think about.
It is a question worth pondering, for sure.
Absolutely.
As we continue to shape the future of learning.
Couldn't agree more.
And remember, the conversation doesn't end here.
It never does.
There's a wealth of information out there.
So much to learn.
Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
I love it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of education.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, happy learning. All right, welcome to another deep dive. This one is going to be great. And, especially if you're trying to really take your English speaking to the next level.
Yeah.
We are tackling a topic today that honestly I think can make a huge difference. And it's something we all know pretty well.
Right.
Our houses and neighborhoods. I mean, it's something we experience every single day. So why not talk about it in English, right?
The perfect practice ground.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, the source material we're diving into today really emphasizes this idea that no matter your English level, talking about your house and neighborhood is like a gold mine for learning and practicing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about this approach is it takes something familiar and turns it into a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. The first section focuses on talking about your house. And you might think, well, that's easy, right?
Yeah.
I live in an apartment, I have a big house. Done. End of story.
Right.
But the material goes so much deeper than that.
It really encourages you to get descriptive, you know, to paint a picture with your words.
Yes.
Yes.
It's not just about giving information. It's about creating an experience for the listener.
Exactly. Like instead of just saying cottage, think about this description.
Okay.
A small, cozy house, often in the countryside.
Oh, I love that. You can just picture it, right? That thatched roof, the little garden.
Exactly.
See, it's way more interesting than just a cottage.
Way more. And it gives you a template, for describing your own place.
Right. Even if you live in a high-rise apartment downtown, you can still use those descriptive words.
Absolutely.
To make it come alive for the listener.
And then you get to describing rooms, but not.
Oh, yeah. How do they approach that?
Well, they don't want you to just list every single room,
Right.
Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. Boring.
Right. Yeah, it's like reading a floor plan.
Exactly. Instead, they say pick one room and really go all in on the details.
Oh, I like that.
They use the living room as an example.
Huh.
And it's amazing what you can say about just one space.
I'm curious. So instead of just saying, my living room has a sofa and a TV. What could you say?
Well, think about it.
Yeah.
You could talk about the soft plush sofa where you curl up with a good book,
Ooh, yeah, comfy.
right? Or the large flat screen TV where you watch movies with friends.
I love that. It's like you're inviting the listener into your home.
Exactly.
And it's those details that make your English sound more natural and engaging.
Totally. And it forces you to think beyond just basic vocabulary.
Right.
Like instead of just sofa, you could use plush, comfortable, maybe even worn in.
Uh-huh.
It's like leveling up your language just by describing something you already know.
And I bet it makes it more fun, too.
Absolutely. So you've painted the picture of the room, right?
Right.
Now let's talk about where your house is located.
Okay, because there's got to be more to it than just saying city, suburbs, or countryside.
You got it. The source material encourages us to use phrases like close to, far from, next to.
Oh, I see how those would be helpful.
Right. So instead of I live in the suburbs, you might say,
Okay.
I live in a quiet suburb, nestled away from the hustle and bustle of the city, but conveniently close to a beautiful park.
Oh, wow. Okay, now you're really painting a picture for me.
Right. It's like a mini story about your location.
Yeah, I love that. And then it gets even more interesting, right?
It does, because they encourage you to share your feelings about your house.
Ooh, that's where the personality comes in.
Exactly. So instead of just saying, my kitchen is small, you could say,
Oh, let me try. I have a tiny kitchen, but I love how cozy it feels.
perfect, you see. And expressing those feelings,
Yeah.
it actually pushes you to use more complex sentences, which is awesome for fluency.
I hadn't even thought about that.
Right. So instead of, I like my house, you might say.
Ooh. Although my house is small, I absolutely adore the warm and welcoming atmosphere it has.
Nailed it.
Wow, I kind of surprised myself there.
And that's the magic of this, right? You're stretching your English skills without even realizing it.
It's true. I'm really starting to see how this whole idea of practicing with everyday topics can really make a difference.
It's powerful stuff. And you know what else I love about this section?
What's that?
It emphasizes how much your house reflects you.
Oh, that's so true. It's like your personality is woven into every room.
Exactly. If you have tons of bookshelves,
Bookworm alert.
right? Or if your kitchen is always spotless,
You love to cook, or maybe you're just really good at cleaning.
it's all those little things that make your English come alive and connect with the listener.
It's like they get a glimpse into your world just by the way you describe your house.
Exactly. And that's the power of using something familiar as a starting point.
You're not just memorizing words or grammar rules.
Yeah.
You're tapping into something real and meaningful to you.
And that makes the learning so much more engaging.
I think that's a great place to transition because
Yeah.
we've talked all about the house itself, but now let's step outside and talk about the neighborhood, shall we?
Let's do it.
All right, because this is where you can really create a vivid picture for your listener.
And what I find interesting is how the source material encourages us to go beyond just listing adjectives.
You mean like quiet, busy, friendly?
Exactly. Instead, think about showing those qualities through examples.
Oh, okay, I get it.
So instead of just saying, my neighborhood is friendly, you might say,
My neighborhood is so friendly that everyone knows each other's names, and we often have impromptu potlucks in the park.
see, now it's not just a general characteristic, it's a real living experience.
That's so much better.
It is. And it ties into another great tip they give.
Okay.
When talking about places nearby, try naming 3 specific places and saying one thing about each.
Oh, I love that. It's like a little challenge to get your descriptive juices flowing.
Right. So instead of there's a grocery store nearby, you might say,
Let me try. Just around the corner from my house is a charming little grocery store with the most delicious, freshly baked bread.
wow, now I want some of that bread.
Me too. But see, it's so much more interesting than just a grocery store.
Right. And it helps you practice building those complete sentences, which is crucial for fluency.
It's like you're giving a mini tour of your neighborhood, pointing out all the hidden gems.
Exactly. And speaking of hidden gems, the source material goes beyond just places and encourages us to talk about the people too.
Ooh, people watching, one of my favorite activities.
And this is where those subtle observations are key.
You mean like, instead of the people in my neighborhood are nice, you could say something more specific.
Exactly. You could say something like,
Okay, let's see. The people here are quiet and keep to themselves, but there's a real sense of community when we all come together for the annual block party.
Excellent. You're not just stating a fact. You're revealing a deeper understanding of the neighborhood's dynamics.
And it shows you're really paying attention, which is important when you're learning a language.
Absolutely. You're not just observing. You're interpreting and expressing.
It's taking it to a whole new level. Wow, we've covered so much ground today.
We have houses, rooms, locations, people.
And I feel like there's one more important thing we need to touch on, something that ties everything together.
Oh, you mean expressing what you like and don't like?
Yes, it's like the secret sauce that adds that personal touch.
And it's not just about sounding more natural, it's about becoming a more confident speaker overall.
Oh, tell me more about that. I'm really intrigued.
Well, I think we should save that for the next part of our deep dive, don't you?
You're right. Let's take a quick break and come back to explore this idea even further.
Sounds good to me. You know, expressing what we like and dislike, it's actually really important for becoming a more confident speaker.
How so?
Well, think about it this way. When you talk about what you like about your house, your neighborhood, you know, you're going beyond just describing things.
Okay.
You're sharing your perspective. You're engaging in a real conversation.
That makes sense. It's like I can say, there's a park near my house.
Right.
But if I say, I love spending sunny afternoons in the park near my house. It's got this beautiful rose garden. Yeah.
Suddenly, it's like the listener is right there with me, experiencing it too.
Exactly. You're creating a connection. And that brings us to a really cool part in the source material.
Oh, what's that?
They have what they call Anna's example.
Okay.
It's basically a complete description of a house and neighborhood,
Oh, cool.
putting all these tips we've talked about into action.
So it's like a blueprint.
Yeah, exactly. It shows you how to structure your thoughts, how to use the vocabulary.
And is it like super long and complicated?
No, actually, that's what I love about it. It's
Right.
clear, it's concise, it proves that you don't have to be, an expert in English to create a vivid and engaging description.
That's so reassuring because I think sometimes people feel like they need to have this huge vocabulary to be fluent.
Yeah, absolutely.
But sometimes simplicity is key.
You got it.
All right, so we've got the blueprint. Now, do they give us any tips for actually, putting this into practice?
They do. There's a whole section on speaking practice tips. Oh, perfect. What are some of the highlights?
Well, some of them are, the usual suspects like practice with a friend.
Right.
But there are a couple that I think are pure gold.
Okay, give me the good stuff.
Okay, one that really stood out to me was recording yourself speaking English.
Oh, yeah, that can be a little scary at first, hearing your own voice.
It can be, but it's so helpful.
Why is that?
Well, it's like holding up a mirror to your speech. You suddenly become aware of, maybe you're stumbling over certain words, maybe your intonation's a little flat. It's like that moment when you hear yourself on a recording and you're like, wait, do I really sound like that?
Right. But it's not just about finding the things you need to improve. It's also about celebrating your progress, Hearing yourself speak more fluently and more confidently over time, that can be really motivating.
I love that. And there was another tip that I thought was really clever.
Which one was that?
Writing down 5 new words from the deep dive.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It's so simple, but it's a great way to actually remember the new vocabulary.
It is, and it gets you actively engaging with the material.
I've already got a few words on my list.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, nuanced is definitely going on there. I've always liked that word, but hearing you use it today, it just really clicked for me.
That's awesome. And it shows how important it is to immerse yourself in the language. You know, whether it's listening to podcasts, reading books, talking to native speakers. The more you expose yourself to English,
Right.
the more naturally those words and phrases become part of your vocabulary.
So we've talked about houses, rooms, neighborhoods, vocabulary, even recording ourselves. It feels like we've covered so much.
We have covered a lot.
Yeah.
And, it's not just about describing our living spaces.
Yeah, what's the bigger picture here?
Well, I think this deep dive has given us a framework for thinking and expressing ourselves in English, no matter what the topic.
Ooh, I like that.
The same principles apply, whether you're talking about your hobbies, your work, your travel plans. It's about using descriptive language, creating those mini narratives, sharing your opinions.
It's like we've been given a set of tools that we can use to build anything.
Exactly. And I think to really solidify everything we've talked about,
Okay.
the source material leaves us with this brilliant challenge.
Ooh, a challenge. I love it. What is it?
Imagine giving a tour of your home, not just describing it, but actually walking someone through it,
Oh, wow. That's a great idea.
pointing out the details, sharing your favorite spots, explaining why you love living there.
It's like we were talking about painting a picture with words before, but this is like interactive storytelling.
It is. And think about all the amazing vocabulary you could use instead of, "This is my bedroom," you could say.
Ooh. Welcome to my sanctuary where I escape the world and recharge.
Perfect. You're not just describing the room, you're sharing a piece of yourself.
And it makes you think about the order you would show things in. Like, first, we'll enter through the grand foyer. Then I'll show you my favorite reading nook.
It's really bringing it to life.
I'm so inspired. I'm already planning my tour in my head.
I love it. And this challenge really highlights something important.
What's that?
Speaking English fluently isn't just about knowing the right words. It's about using your imagination, creating an experience for the listener.
It's like taking them on a journey.
Exactly. And I think that's where true confidence comes from, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. When you're not just reciting facts, but you're sharing your perspective, connecting with your audience.
It's about making it your own.
You know what? This whole deep dive has been about so much more than just houses and neighborhoods.
It has, hasn't it?
We've discovered a whole new way of thinking about English speaking.
We have, and I'm so excited for you to continue exploring all the possibilities that fluent English opens up.
Me too. And I think the most important thing to remember is it's not about perfection. It's about embracing the journey and having fun along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Go out there, give those imaginary tours.
And don't forget to invite us over.
That's so true. It really is like interactive storytelling. And I love how you can use such evocative language.
Oh, yeah.
Like instead of, "This is my bedroom," it's, "Welcome to my sanctuary where I escape the world and recharge."
I love it. And it makes you think about the flow, how would you actually lead someone through your house?
Yeah, where would you start? What would you show them first?
Exactly. Maybe you start with like a grand entrance and then you highlight, the architectural details.
Oh yeah, like the crown molding or the archways.
Right, or the way the light comes in through the windows.
Or even like the smell of freshly baked cookies if you're really going all out.
Now you're talking. See, this is what I love about this challenge. It sparks so many creative ideas. It does, and it makes me realize that speaking English fluently, it's not just about the words themselves.
Right.
It's about using your imagination, creating an experience for the listener.
Absolutely. And that's where true confidence comes from, don't you think?
I think so. It's like you're not just reciting information, you're really connecting with your audience.
You're sharing your world with them.
Exactly. And, I think that's the biggest takeaway from this whole deep dive.
What's that?
We started with something simple, our houses and neighborhoods, but we ended up discovering a whole new approach to English speaking.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And it's made me feel so much more confident, not just in my vocabulary or grammar,
Right.
but in my ability to really express myself.
That's wonderful to hear. And remember, the key is to keep practicing, keep experimenting, keep having fun with it.
I will. I'm actually excited to go home and try this tour challenge.
I think you'll love it.
Yeah.
And you might even discover new things about your own home in the process.
That's a great point. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing all these insights with us.
It's been my pleasure, truly, and I'm so excited to see where your English-speaking journey takes you.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this adventure. We hope you've learned something new, and we can't wait to see you on our next deep dive.
All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. Today, we're going to explore the amazing evolution of the smartphone based on your source, smartphone evolution, from brick to pocket supercomputer. We're going to trace how we got from those clunky early phones to the awesome gadgets we can't live without today. It's pretty wild to think that what you're probably using right now to listen to this all started with a device that weighed over 2 pounds.
It really is a remarkable story of transformation, isn't it? And what's, I think, really interesting is how this whole evolution shows how different technologies all came together. The phone itself was just the beginning.
So let's rewind all the way back to the start, before we had smartphones as we know them. We're talking 1973, New York City. Martin Cooper makes that very first public cell phone call. Can you imagine using the Motorola Dynatac? That massive brick phone. It's like mind-blowing.
Can you imagine a 10-hour charge just to talk for a measly, 30 minutes?
Nah.
And no screen, no apps, you couldn't even text. It really shows how basic mobile communication was back then.
Seriously, it makes you appreciate how much we have now. Then in the 80s, we see the Motorola MicroTac with its flip design. Definitely a step towards a phone you could actually carry around, But these phones were still crazy expensive, weren't they?
Oh, for sure. Cost was a huge obstacle for a lot of people. You know, the microTAC was a status symbol, something only a few could afford. And this is important, actually, I think. Having awesome tech isn't enough. It needs to be accessible, for people to actually use it widely.
That's such a good point. It's not just about the tech itself, it's about who can get their hands on it. Okay, so then we hit the 90s and 2G digital networks roll out. This felt like, like a real game changer, right?
Yeah, it was a major turning point, not just because calls were clearer and batteries lasted longer, but because 2G made something we take for granted possible. Texting. The introduction of SMS, short message service, was absolutely revolutionary.
I get why it was such a big deal, but what exactly about 2G made texting possible? What was different about the technology?
Well, 2G networks use digital signals, which means they could send these little data packets, which are way smaller than the voice signals used in the old analog networks. These data packets were perfect for sending, short bursts of text, making SMS efficient and, affordable.
That makes a lot of sense. So texting, something we just do without thinking now, was actually this huge leap forward technologically.
It totally changed the way we communicate. Suddenly, you didn't have to be on the phone at the same time to have a conversation. Plus, and let's be honest, texting was just fun.
It was. So right in the middle of all this digital change, we see the IBM Simon come out in 1994, considered the first, real smartphone. It had a touchscreen, email, a calendar, even apps. It was way ahead of its time, right?
The IBM Simon was amazing for its time, but it didn't have the infrastructure that smartphones need today, the stuff we just expect.
Think about it. Even if the tech is there, you need reliable networks, a whole bunch of apps, and it can't be too expensive for a smartphone to really take off. It's like all the pieces need to be in place for a real smartphone revolution to happen. But the Simon, not doing so well, didn't stop things from moving forward. Companies like Nokia and Ericsson were making progress with those feature phones, devices that did more than basic calls, but weren't quite smartphones. The Nokia 9000 communicator was an interesting early example.
The 9000 communicator, yeah, with its clamshell design and QWERTY keyboard, it sort of hinted at the possibility of mobile devices becoming more than just, communication tools. And then there's the iconic Nokia 3310. I bet a lot of people listening remember that one, from 2000.
Oh, the 3310, a classic. I can't tell you how many hours I spent playing Snake on that phone. But as we get into the early 2000s, there's this key shift happening. Mobile phones and PDAs are starting to merge. Things like the Palm Pilot and the Handspring Trio were early examples of that.
People wanted the organization stuff from PDAs, but also the ability to make calls. The Handspring Trio 180 in 2002 was a big step in that direction. Touchscreen, email, and that thumb keyboard layout we still use today.
So we were getting closer, right, to the smartphone. But there was still something missing, wouldn't you say? That's when BlackBerry jumps into the picture.
BlackBerry started as a pager in 1999, and then it evolved into a phone by 2002. That focus on secure email and BBM messaging, it really caught on, especially with people in business.
The Crackberry era. Everyone was hooked on those QWERTY keyboards and, being connected all the time. But BlackBerry wasn't the only one trying to figure out the smartphone formula. Nokia was pushing its Symbian OS, and Microsoft had Windows Mobile. Were those platforms real contenders, though?
Those early smartphone platforms, they had big goals. They were often kind of clunky and just not that user-friendly. That intuitive experience that everyone would want later on just wasn't there yet. But, the stage was set for a major disruption, and that's where we'll pick up in part 2. The iPhone arrives, and then the smartphone boom begins.
And we're back for part 2 of the deep dive. We were just talking about how the world was ready for a real smartphone revolution. And then, in 2007, it happened.
That's when Steve Jobs showed off the iPhone, calling it, a revolutionary product. But, whether it was actually revolutionary or more like the result of all those earlier innovations, that's up for debate.
I see what you mean. It wasn't like the very first touchscreen phone, but it definitely felt different. What do you think really set the iPhone apart from, those earlier phones?
Well, there are a few things, right? First, the iPhone had a capacitive touchscreen, a type of technology that reacted to, the electrical conductivity of your finger. That meant you could do multi-touch gestures like pinching and zooming. It was so much better than those old resistive touchscreens where you needed stylus and everything felt clunky. Second, the iPhone's design, it was so sleek and minimalist, nothing like the, bulkier phones back then. And then there was Apple's iOS software with its intuitive interface and focus on making things easy to use. It made the iPhone a joy to use.
That focus on the user experience, making it easy and enjoyable, that seems so important. I remember using some of those early touchscreen phones, and they were so hard to figure out. The iPhone was like a breath of fresh air.
Totally. And then 2008, Apple launched the App Store, and that's when things really blew up. All of a sudden, the iPhone wasn't just a phone, it was like a platform for all kinds of apps.
The App Store was genius. It not only gave users access to tons of apps, but it also let those independent developers, make and sell their own software. That had a huge impact on the mobile economy, leading to all those mobile games, productivity apps, social media, the whole thing.
It turned the iPhone into a device you could customize to do exactly what you wanted. That level of personalization, nobody had seen that before, and it was a big part of why the iPhone became so successful. And Apple kept making it better. The iPhone 4 in 2010, it came with that Retina display, packing in an insane amount of pixels into such a small screen. That set a new standard for mobile displays.
And, the front-facing camera on the iPhone 4, it might seem like a small thing, but wow, it really changed things culturally. That's when the selfie era started, and how we document and share our lives, it all changed.
Yeah. So while Apple was doing its thing with the iPhone, Google was working on their own mobile operating system, Android. It launched in 2008 with the HTC Dream, and it took a very different approach to the smartphone.
Android was all about being open and letting you customize things, wasn't it?
Yeah.
How did that compare to Apple's, more controlled way of doing things?
Google basically created an open source platform so manufacturers could tweak the software and make a bunch of different devices at different prices. That led to, a bunch of Android phone makers, each doing their own thing with the operating system. Samsung, with its Galaxy S series, became like the main Android brand, going head to head with the iPhone in terms of popularity and features.
And that rivalry is still going strong. The competition between Apple and Samsung has pushed both of them to constantly innovate. But it wasn't just about those two. The 2010s saw a real smartphone boom, with companies like Xiaomi, Oppo, and Huawei all coming in, each targeting different markets and, pushing the limits of what a smartphone could do.
Yeah, that boom was driven by a few things. First, prices dropped a lot, making smartphones affordable for way more people. Second, 4G networks came out everywhere, offering those faster data speeds and smoother internet experience. And third, features that used to be, like premium features, things like GPS, high-quality cameras, and a ton of apps, those became standard on almost all smartphones.
Those like this perfect storm. Affordability, connectivity, and features all coming together to create this explosion of smartphone adoption.
Exactly, and that widespread adoption led to even faster advancements in technology. We should dive into some of those key innovations that defined the 2010s.
Let's do it.
One area that's really impressive is the evolution of smartphone cameras. They went from basic single-lens cameras to, these complex multi-camera systems that could rival, those standalone DSLRs in terms of image quality.
The advancements in smartphone cameras came from a few things. First, better sensor technology, meaning better low-light performance and higher resolution pictures. Second, having multiple lenses, each with a different purpose, like wide-angle, telephoto, macro, that gave you way more options when taking pictures. And finally, computational photography, which uses software to enhance images. That completely changed the game. Google's Pixel phones and Apple's iPhone 11 series were pioneers in that area.
It's crazy how much computational photography has improved smartphone photos. It's like having a little photo editor right in your phone.
It really is. And it wasn't just cameras. Smartphone screens also changed a lot. They got bigger with those thinner bezels for that immersive experience. We even saw edge-to-edge displays and foldable screens like the Samsung Galaxy Fold. That was a glimpse into the future of smartphone design. I remember the Galaxy Fold definitely turned some heads. It felt like something out of a sci-fi movie. But besides those visual advancements, we also saw huge jumps in performance, right?
Oh, for sure. Under the hood, smartphones were getting incredibly powerful. Chips like Apple's A series and Qualcomm's Snapdragon processors turned smartphones into mini computers. They could handle those demanding tasks like gaming, video editing, even augmented reality stuff.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about connectivity. 5G networks started rolling out in 2019, and they promised even faster speeds and lower latency, which meant new possibilities for things like mobile gaming, streaming, even things like remote surgery.
And then there's AI. Artificial intelligence, virtual assistants like Siri and Google Assistant, they became a normal part of life, letting you use your voice to control your phone. And on-device machine learning was being used to make everything better, from cameras to battery life.
It's wild to think that all these things that seemed so futuristic back then are just like everyday things now. We've come so far from those clunky old phones to these sleek, powerful devices that are such a big part of our lives.
And as smartphones got more powerful and more people had them, their impact went way beyond just making calls or sending texts. They started to, change society in all sorts of ways.
That's a really good point. We've talked a lot about tech side of smartphones, but let's switch gears and talk about their cultural impact.
Yeah.
How did these devices change how we connect with each other, how we work, how we entertain ourselves, even how we think?
Yeah, that's exactly what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. Stick with us as we get into the social impact of smartphones and think about, what the future might hold for these devices that have become so central to our lives.
And we're back for the final part of the deep dive. So we've been on this journey through the evolution of the smartphone, from those early clunky devices to the pocket supercomputers we use every day. But as we talked about, the smartphone story isn't just about, hardware and software. It's about how these little gadgets have changed, really changed society in our lives.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how something that started as a way to just talk to people has become so, essential to almost every part of our lives. So smartphones have changed how we connect, how we work, how we get information, maybe even how we think.
Absolutely. One of the biggest and most obvious impacts has been the rise of, social media. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they all just blew up when smartphones became popular, and I think it's safe to say that smartphones were a big reason for that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Smartphones made social media portable and easy to use, so it became this constant thing in our lives. We could connect with friends and family, share our thoughts and what we were doing, get news and information all in real time from a device in our pocket. That had a huge impact on how we build relationships, how we stay informed, even how we participate in public conversations.
It's mind-blowing when you think about how social media went from being mostly on desktops to being mainly a mobile thing. And it's not just how we socialize that's changed. Smartphones have completely transformed how we work, too. The gig economy, with apps like Uber and DoorDash, it wouldn't even exist without smartphones.
The gig economy is a great example of how smartphones have made new types of work and, entrepreneurship possible. Now we can work remotely, work on projects from anywhere, and get information right away. That flexibility and being connected all the time has been a huge deal for a lot of industries. But it's also brought up new questions about work-life balance and that, always-on work culture.
Yeah, it's kind of a good and bad thing, right? The same technology that lets you be more flexible also makes it harder to, actually disconnect from work. And speaking of being connected, we can't forget about, entertainment. Mobile gaming just exploded, with games like Angry Birds and PUBG Mobile becoming huge. And then streaming services like Netflix and Spotify turned our smartphones into entertainment centers you can carry around.
That's true. Smartphones have really changed how we spend our free time. We have access to tons of movies, music, podcasts, games, all just a few taps away. It's awesome in a lot of ways, but it's also led to concerns about screen time, attention spans, and, the potential for addiction.
It feels like we're always getting hit with stimulation, and it can be hard to just put the phone down and, be present. And besides those concerns about screen time and addiction, there's also the whole issue of data privacy. The Cambridge Analytica scandal back in 2018 showed just how much data our smartphones collect about us and how that data can be, misused.
That's really important to remember. Smartphones track our location, what we look at online, our contacts, what we buy, so much more. The possibility of someone misusing that data is, it's a real concern, and it's something we have to be aware of as we rely on these devices more and more.
So where do we go from here? As of March 2025, it seems like the smartphone market is in a phase of, more refining things rather than big revolutions. We're seeing those incremental upgrades. Foldable phones are becoming more popular, but they're still pretty pricey, and there's a lot of talk about augmented reality and virtual reality, with Apple's Vision Pro headset as a big example.
The Vision Pro, yeah, it suggests that smartphones might become like portals to these more immersive digital experiences. It's almost like blurring the lines between, the real world and the virtual world. We're also seeing more focus on sustainability with those modular designs and software updates lasting longer, which is great.
And of course, battery tech is still a big thing. The potential of those solid-state batteries, the ones that could last way longer and charge super fast, that's pretty exciting.
And there's more attention being paid to privacy and security. More people are interested in those decentralized apps where you have more control over your data, and those encrypted communication platforms are becoming more common too.
So as we look ahead, the big question is, I guess, will smartphones keep evolving? Or will they become something completely different? Will we see more wearables like smart glasses or even neural interfaces? Or maybe there'll be a backlash against being constantly connected, and we'll see people going back to, simpler devices.
Yeah, the future of the smartphone is definitely uncertain. It's something we should all think about. Will we just keep integrating these devices more and more into our lives? Or will we get to a point where we want a, more balanced relationship with technology?
That's a question we all have to answer for ourselves, I guess. The smartphone journey has been wild, going from those basic beginnings to a device that has, really changed the world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the evolution of the smartphone. We'd love to hear what you think about where this tech might go next, so, share your thoughts, keep the conversation going. Until next time.